The t-shirt on.
Yeah.
All right. Hang on, okay, cool. Yeah, that's on. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about note taking today with me again. So just firstly, has anyone had a look in their bags at any of the stuff that you've got in there? I totally forgot to mention it this morning. I was too busy thinking about all the other things that I had to tell you guys. But you do have these little study skills workbooks in there. And they have, firstly, some of the stuff that I was talking about this morning, those 5 strategies that I went through are in there. There's also all the contact details for the staff here are in there. And then I've also got some of the key stuff that I'm going to go through in regards to note-taking in there as well. So, so just sort of, and then examples of a couple of the templates I'm going to talk through. So if you want to have these out and you can have a look as we're chatting. There's also 2 other kind of booklets in there. One of them is a transition to uni one. So that's got, again, a lot of that same stuff we went through this morning with some more detail. And the other one is all about time management and organisation. So all the stuff I was talking about this morning is written out in full in there. And then if you have any other questions or whatever it is about any of that stuff, you can come and see me. So do use those because there's a lot of ink to print all of them. So I think them are good use of resources. But we're going to start, we're going to talk about note-taking. This is, I guess, probably one of the most important skills that you'll need to learn at uni. And it is a skill as well that you'll need to use in a bunch of workplaces as well once you've finished. And there's a couple of reasons why it's important, but before I sort of get into that, I just want to know like what your experiences are with note-taking, because it's one of those things that some people just hate, or they feel like, oh, I just do it because I feel like I have to, but I don't really know why I do it. Or I never use my notes, or I get so unorganized with my notes that I just give up halfway through semester and never look at them again. Do you guys have particular methods for note-taking? Do you find it useful in your previous experience at all?
Yeah. I basically just write down everything.
Yeah. That is, one way of going about it. I do as well. When I was in undergrad, I used to just furiously write everything that the lecturer was saying because I was so afraid that I was going to miss something important or not understand something. But then I realized that sometimes I was writing too much and I wasn't able to actually use my notes. So hopefully I'm going to be able to teach you how to take effective notes so that you're not just sort of writing down everything furiously, but actually writing down the right stuff at the right time so that you can actually use it in your study. So I think in order to know how to write notes, it's really important to start with why. Why it's important, because it is. It's not just about having something you can study from later. But really good notes, so they help you understand the actual topic more. So we use them for revision, but really what notes are doing is they are activating your listening. So have you kind of heard of passive listening versus active listening? Right? So when we're actively listening, we're actually processing information at a much higher rate. And when you take notes, because you need to process the information, I'll talk a bit more about this in my next slide, it strengthens your memory. So your brain, every time you recall something or you have to process some information, because when you're writing, it goes through an extra step. It's not just being listened to, it's going in your hand, in your ears, through your brain, out through your hand. That's creating much stronger neural pathways in your brain. They're going to help you remember that information. And of course, so that's internal storage. But they also are external storage, memory storage as well, of course, because if you forget something, you just pick up your book and look it up, and there it is. And it helps you to be able to find information later on if you need it. So the science does say that when we take notes, we remember much, much more of what we've learned, but we also understand it at a deeper level. And so this is because it's an information processing tool. And it's basically, because you can't write at the same speed as somebody's speaking, right? So the average speaker speaks at 180 words per minute, okay? And I don't know if you guys know how quickly you can write, but it is not 180 words per minute. I don't think any human in the world can probably write full, maybe some of the there's people who win awards for being really fast typists. They might be able to do 180 words a minute, but unless you're Olympic level typing, you're probably not writing at 180 words a minute. And so what we need to do is we need to listen selectively. We need to be able to paraphrase that information, which means that we're turning it into our own words. We have to listen out for what's the core information. We're not going to write in full sentences, right? We're going to shorten it. We're going to get to the essentials of what we need. So your brain doing that process, even really, really quickly in the moment, as you write it down, makes your cognitive processes work, which actually means you're more likely to understand it and retain it. So there is a lot of science behind this. And then also, I guess, because if you're trying to remember a lot of stuff at once, we get cognitively overloaded. Have you heard of the term cognitive overload? Right? It's basically when our brain is trying to do too many things at once and it just sort of flatlines. So have you ever had that feeling when you're I don't know, maybe in a lecture or something, and then just it's so much information coming at you that you just kind of go, and then it's you can hear the heartbeat of your brain go to nothingness. It's because your brain's shut down. It kind of actually closes over like that, right? So if you take notes, you're relieving some of the pressure of your brain to try to remember everything. And so therefore, you're less likely to become cognitively overloaded. If that makes sense. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Yeah? Does that kind of fit with some of your experiences with taking notes? Yeah? Does that feel like the opposite of anyone? Does anyone have any contrary?
I kind of get whenever I'm really passionate about studying or something, I get a fast feeling. It's really weird. So I'll be so intrigued about what I'm learning that I'll just it feels like I'm moving at a faster pace than everything around me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That I wonder, because that might be something similar to flow, which is when you enter, you're in a super concentrated state, and you're able to block out everything else that's happening around you and just get completely in the zone. Yeah, that might be what that is.
It's hard to explain.
Yeah, yeah. I do think I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Hopefully that does happen, because then you'll probably be able to write really excellent notes.
Yeah, hopefully.
Because you'll be concentrating. So it is, it's important for your revision, and that's probably a lot of what you'll be using your notes for, to revise for exams, or to collect information when you're doing research so that you can write assignments. So it is largely about having that external memory, that storage of information that you can refer to. But what I really want to emphasize is that it is actually just also a really important part of your learning, and about becoming a more intelligent person who's able to think, think broadly, problem solve really quickly, and have really well-developed critical thinking skills. So it's working on those two levels, basically. So how do you all take notes? What are your processes at the moment? What do you have any particular note-taking strategies or any templates that you use or anything?
I just write down the key points, and then down the bottom, if there's further reading or anything, I just highlight what I need to read further outside of the thing.
Cool.
And then revise and then expand on what those key points were, to go a little bit more in depth if I'm a little bit unsure or need that time to process a little bit more.
Yeah. And so do you leave yourself space, do you mean, at the bottom of your page?
Like that.
Yeah, great, perfect. Yep, that's very similar to a method that I'm going to talk about, actually. So that's a really good one. So, and when you're writing down the key points, you're just sort of listening for those key ideas. You're not writing down full sentences or anything?
No, so then I have a second note to record, when I was working is when you would expand on those points.
Yeah.
So it's sort of there's the key point, and then it sort of jogs your memory into, and then you can go fully in depth without missing out on other points during the lecture when a young person's speaking.
Great, that's excellent. I really recommend that method. And I've got some templates that I will show you that will help you to organise that system. But yeah, that's because one way that you want to think about your notes, I guess, is that this is for your future self. Okay, this is entirely for you. They're not to help anybody but you. So figure out a system that works best for you, right? And that's going to make your job easy in the future. So if you're doing something like just using the keywords so that you can then get back to the lecture and not miss anything else, and if you know, okay, after the lecture, I'm going to go back to some of this information and I can expand on it or whatever, like, you know, that's great because you're creating a system for yourself, an organizational system. Are there any other methods that anyone uses?
I similarly write down the key points, but I also ask myself questions.
That's great. Yes.
So in case, like, if I'm not sure about something, I just write a quick note going, I write the key point, it's like, why is this, or what, like, whatever I'm curious about with that note.
Yep.
I don't leave myself space because I always will look at it objectively as a reflection.
Yeah.
Also then actively...
Yeah, so you don't go
going
back and literally
yeah.
answer the question, but you're leaving it for yourself to
Yeah,
think
that's
about
right.
later.
And that way,
Yeah.
I can sort of pick up on what I was thinking up on at the time, but if I have another view or I've thought about it and I'll come back to it, I can sort of go and reflect on that.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that is also an excellent method that I'm also going to talk about with one of my templates. So writing questions for yourself, because this is the other thing. Often when you're in like a lecture or something, you might feel like you're trying to keep up with what the lecturer is saying. So you're, you know, scribbling notes as fast as you can, but quite often there's stuff that you maybe don't get at the time. But sometimes you're so busy trying to keep up with what they're saying, you don't actually think to stop. Or you just feel like you should, this is something I'm supposed to know. So maybe I won't ask myself a question like, oh, maybe find the definition for this later. Or like, how does this connect to what we were talking about last week? Or is this relevant to this, you know, whatever it is? And you can do the same thing with anything else. It doesn't just have to be questions. It can be comments for yourself like, this idea seems to connect really well with this reading that we were doing. You know, so maybe that's a note for my future self to look up and see if that connection is there, because that might be something you're going to do in an essay or something like that. So yeah, writing those sort of reflective questions and notes to self is really good. Any others?
It's like kind of like that, but so like once you've got the grips of what you're trying to like learn about, usually like what I do is like I don't really live with anyone, but whenever I like around friends or something, I try to like explain what
Yes.
I like have learned. So if I can explain it, then I think I like grips it way better. Like I understand it and memorize it.
100%. If you can explain it to somebody else, okay, so you often don't realize how much you know about something until you try to explain it to somebody else. That is such a good way to consolidate your knowledge, like honestly. And again, it taps into one of my templates. So I will read, all three of you have like kind of brought up really important stuff. And that's a really important thing for when you're revising as well. So if your notes are acting as a tool for your like exam or test revision, having space at the bottom of your notes where you can summarize them or where you can, you know, use your notes to kind of, okay, I'll read over my notes and now I'm going to say it out loud as though I'm explaining to somebody. Or if you have somebody in the house that you can grab and go, hey, I'm just going to tell you about this concept so I can check that I understand it. It's perfect. It's a really good way of doing that. So yeah, I will go through the templates that bring all those three things in a moment. But really, in order to, it's sometimes really hard to take notes, especially when you're in a live lecture situation, because like I said, speakers often speak at about 180 words a minute. So they're speaking really quickly. So you need to be able to be prepared so that you know what kinds of notes you need to take. That's probably one of the biggest challenges you have when you first arrive at university, is because you arrive in a lecture and you might have very little context for what that lecture is really about or what knowledge your tutor or lecturer wants you to take away from it. And therefore, what should you actually be taking note of? You know, what information do you need to write down and what do you not need to worry about? So there's a few tricks that you can start to use for this. So firstly, yeah, avoid any distractions. Especially if you are taking notes on a computer or something like that, like just like close your browsers that aren't relevant, which if you're taking notes should be everything. And another really good way is to be prepared for class. So come to class having done the pre-readings. have a look in the topic guidebook and see what is the key idea for this week. Quite often they will tell you the structure of each week, or the key ideas or the key themes that are going to be discussed in each lecture or tutorial. So have a look and see what that is, because that will give you an idea of what you need to be listening out for. Have a look as well as what your upcoming assessment is. So if you have a look at what your essay questions look like, what keywords are in the essay questions? Because that, again, you'll know what to be listening out for if you've already prepared by knowing what words are in the questions. You can also think about how the ideas in the lecture might relate to other things like what you've been discussing in tutorials or what the titles of the readings that you've got are, Another thing, I think I've actually got, oh no, not yet. Is pay attention to what the lecture's called. Actually spend time analysing something like a title, because there's often a lot of information that you can take away in a title. Even words, and if you're also thinking about essay questions, the difference between the words how and why, for example, can tell you what information to be listening out for. If you've got an essay question that's asking you why something happens, then in the lecture you want to be listening to reasons and theories and things like that. If your question's asking you how something happens, well, you want to be listening out for processes. So those are two kind of different things, right? But if you've thought ahead, then you're a little bit more prepared. And when your ear hears, them say particular words, you go, they're talking about this thing. Okay, I'm going to pay more attention and write more detailed notes now. The other thing as well is just remember that because the lectures are recorded, sometimes you might just want to sit in the lecture and take in the information the first time and then actually go back and rewatch them online and do your note taking the second time when you're already a little bit more familiar with the content and when you already have an idea of maybe how those ideas are relevant to the readings or the tutorial discussion or something like that. So don't feel like you have to do all of this in one go, in that lecture the first time. So then we've got the question of whether you do this by hand or by typing. So who likes to write their notes physically in a notebook? Okay, cool. Still quite a few people. Who likes to type their notes in class? Okay, so there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Okay, so technically the science says that longhand is better in terms of cognitive processing. So in that comprehending and being able to retain information for longer, longhand is better. And that's again because it's using more of it's using muscle memory and things like that, and it's creating more neural pathways in your brain than just typing does. And because longhand takes longer to do, it's not as fast as typing, you're forced to paraphrase and you're forced to turn the lecturer's words into your own, which means you're doing more of that cognitive work. You're doing more listening out for what's actually really important. So that sort of leads to deeper processing. The disadvantage is that it is slow, right? So that slowness can be a good thing for your comprehension, but sometimes it's just not very practical, okay? So typing can be better in the sense that because it's faster, you can keep up with the information a little bit faster, which depending on what you're studying might be important. So if you're studying something like medicine, they're going to tell you a lot of things that you need to know in a very short amount of time. So typing might be better for a topic like that. You can also organize your notes easier when you type them on a computer because you can just sort of copy and paste and you can rearrange really easily, as opposed to having a notebook where you might have to scribble stuff out or run out of space and need to come back to an idea. So basically though, my rule is whatever works for you, just do it properly, okay? So if you're going to go longhand, I would recommend at the beginning of your notebook, write yourself a contents page. Remember, again, this is for your future self. So you want to make the work for yourself as easy as possible. Don't leave yourself with a bunch of chaos that you'll need to sort through at the end of semester. So write a contents page, label every page as you go, like put the date, the title of the lecture, a page number on it. And don't just cram all of your notes closely together. Give yourself a little bit of space so that you can come back if you need to. If you miss something, you can return to it and you've got some space to like write extra notes or answer some of those questions you've asked of yourself or something. And if you're going to use online, create folders or, work out, you're going to have a different Word document for every lecture. You're going to have one document for each topic and use headings or something like that. So just whatever it is that you do, try to be really organized about it because that's going to save you a lot of grief in the long run. I was not organized. I always had really good intentions to be organized with my notes when I was in undergrad, and I'd buy like one of those notebooks that's got like the 5 different colored pages so that you have a different topic. And I don't know what would happen every year. I would just get behind and go, I'll finish those notes later. I'll just, use this page and write this other stuff. And of course, I'd never go back and finish the other ones, and they would just end up chaotic. So the more organized you can be earlier, the better. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to say that's just the previous slide from what I was talking about before. So this is comes back to what I was talking about before in terms of how do you know what to take notes about. So something I didn't mention, there is the titles of the slides and the key words from your topic handbook, but also use the body language of the lecturer as well. So if they are, talking about something really important, they're probably going to get a little bit more, they might speak faster, they might gesture more, they might use a louder volume. Of course, every lecturer is different. If they're using an example, they'll probably be a little bit more relaxed. They'll probably be, a little bit slower or something because they're probably just thinking of it at the time. So you'll get used to each different lecturer that you have and how they deliver information, but there are some clues in there as well. And don't forget to use the slides. You don't have to write down every word that's on the slides because you can access those on flow later, right? So instead you want to be thinking about, what am I going to need this information for? Am I using this information for an assignment? Am I going to be using it for revision? And take notes accordingly. Don't just write down everything that's on the slide because you can just find that, on the slides. If you want to understand it and get that deeper level of processing, you should be combining what's on the slides with what the lecturer is saying because they're always going to be saying more than what is on the slides. The slides are just going to have the basics, right? Yeah, okay. So the other thing, has anyone used shorthand? Oh, wow, really? Do you have your own version or you sort of learnt it?
Learned it.
Yeah.
So when I was working with young people, often they would make quite disclosures.
Yeah.
And so sometimes if you were taking notes, you would have to remember, instead of writing down full sentences,
Yeah.
or you are observing a young person's behaviour, for instance, we'll just write BH for
Yeah.
behaviour.
Yeah.
And it's just easier and quicker to retain
Yeah.
information and come back to it
Yeah.
later.
Perfect. So that's something that you all might want to test out as well. And again, in your different disciplines, there will probably be words that will come up quite commonly, like discipline-specific language, things like that. And you might be able to create your own shorthand system so that you can write notes faster, so that you can use shortcuts. I also recommend using colours, colour coordinate your notes if you need to. Use diagrams and arrows, and that's another way of being able to process that information at a deeper level as well. If we're using, it's called dual coding, when you're using both visual and verbal information. So don't be afraid to sort of get messy, If you miss something, you can always come back to it later. Don't panic, just move on, leave yourself some space. And this idea of giving yourself space in the margin, which kind of comes back to what you were just talking a bit about, is really important for just capturing the key ideas. And I'll talk about this in a second because I'm going to talk about a different method. So here's a couple of note-taking methods that you can try. And I do have them in here so you can see them as well. So the first one is called the outline method. And this is something that people who tend to type notes use more commonly. And this is a method of note taking I tend to use as well when I'm taking notes from readings specifically, or when I'm taking notes to use for an assignment. So if I'm doing research, because it's sort of a hierarchical method of note taking. So it allows you really to categorize information. Okay, so it may not be quite as useful in a lecture, but it's probably more useful in something like doing your research and your essay planning, because that you break up your page into sort of topics and sub-ideas. So if you've got a main idea, you put that at the top, then you indent and come in so that you can sort of see how everything is related to each other. Does that make sense? You know? And you sort of can keep going in as far as you need to, really. The important thing is that you're creating this logical structure. And this method is easier to use on a computer because you can rearrange things. Like quite often if I'm doing research, I might start with my main topic and my 2 subtopics. Then as I'm reading, I'm going to be able to go back and go, okay, I'm going to add this piece of evidence from this reading I'm going to put in here. This piece of evidence from this one is related to this idea. Or then I might decide, actually, I think this idea belongs up here as opposed to down here. And you can shuffle and rearrange. So this method is all about logic, structure, and order. You can use it in lectures if you want to. You could use like the lecture slides as your main headings, for example. But yeah, so that's one. The other one, which I really do recommend, is called the Cornell method. Has anyone ever heard of this? Yeah, great. It's a really, really great way to take notes in a lecture. So what it does is it breaks up your page into three sections. In the left margin here, which is sort of, I don't know, it's probably you want slightly wider than you'd probably normally do on a margin on a page. But this is where you keep track of things like the key ideas. So it's a way of categorizing. So key ideas, any questions you ask for yourself, you can use it as that hierarchical thing. So if you've got like, oh, what's the theme that they're talking about here? And it helps you come back, when you come back to your notes later, if you're like, oh, okay, so I need to talk, I can't even think of a single example. In Lauren's workshop about note taking, she was talking about the Cornell method. Where's that? And if I've written on the side of my notes here, Cornell method, because that's my key word, then I've got the notes that have all the details about that. I can easily see that, right? And I can go back. Or you can use this for any main ideas, but there's the type of things that are only a couple of words each. So you're keeping it really, really short and succinct. This section here is where you have all of your actual notes, right? All the notes that you'd normally take in a lecture. And in this section, you can use the outline method. If you wanted to, you can put one inside the other. So you can still have that hierarchy and order if you need to. At the bottom, and this is a really important one, we have the summary section. So at the end of the lecture, you would go back through your notes and write a really brief couple of sentence summary of all of the notes on that page. And that's coming back to this whole idea of if you were to explain this to somebody else, how would you explain it? Because you want to be able to distill all of the important information into that short little section. If you can do that successfully, you've probably understood the content really well. Like it's a super important exercise for being able to test yourself about whether or not you fully understood something. So if you're trying to write that summary and you still feel like, I don't know how to summarize this because I probably don't fully understand it, that's an indication to yourself that maybe you need to, go back over things, maybe go back to the lecture slides or rewatch the lecture or go to your readings or something like that to try to understand it more deeply. The other advantage of this is that if you're coming back to your notes for revision at a future date, you can just read the summary of each section and go, oh yeah, I remember that's what we were talking about that week. And then if you need to go deeper, you can read your main notes and use your left margin to help navigate you through those notes. Okay, so this is a super organized method that I really highly recommend. like really, if you can. And I've given you kind of that example in there as well. Let me go, John, 5 minutes. Okay. Again, depending on what your notes are for, you might want to come back to them later. And this is, again, if you're doing things like writing yourself questions or things you need to reflect on later, it is important to come back. So go and also if you've had the lecture and you've got your tutorial coming up, you might want to go back to the lecture notes to remind yourself, what did they talk about? What things did I understand and what didn't I understand? You know, because the tutorial is your opportunity to ask those kinds of questions, to bring them up with your tutor and say, oh, hey, so the lecturer mentioned this. What does it actually mean? Or how is that connected to this idea? So go back through your notes, highlight anything you think is really important. You know, you may go back to your notes after the tutorial as well to help fill in some of the gaps and help you understand. But what's important is that this is about helping you to retain that information and make your note-taking practice a really active one. I know I keep saying that, active, 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 but it's just, that's what is super important about this. That's how you're going to remember stuff. You know, that's how you're going to develop your comprehension. And this is when you can write the summary as well. Sometimes you might want to leave that summary section for a few days later. Let that information sit and then come back and write your summary. And that's a really useful kind of revision tool as well for when you're preparing for exams and things like that. Another thing you might want to try with your note-taking is a mind map, something visual. And this is about kind of moving away from just purely relying on words and verbal ideas. You can see different kinds of connections between ideas when you use mind maps. It might help you to be able to understand something in a different way, see connections you didn't see before, see problems that you maybe didn't see before. And this is also something that's really useful to do with your notes, again, for exam revision. You know, so a couple of weeks before your exams, when you get your notes out again, you might want to go through them and create a mind map of them. You can also use it when you're planning for an essay. You know, so if you're going through your notes, you want to be able to create a structured essay plan. So you've got to figure out what your key ideas are, what information is relevant to each idea. A mind map is really useful for something like that. So you can even leave space in your notes to come back to them maybe weeks and weeks later to create a mind map. And that's pretty much it. So we've only got like a couple of minutes left before the next session. So does anyone have any questions about any of that, questions or comments or anything? I know that was a bit of a rushed explanation of note-taking, but you can always, again, come and see me if you need any help with any of it. So,
oh, do you have any of those sheets on you now, or
like actual
yeah,
ones of these?
Yeah, I didn't get one of those.
I don't, but I can get you one.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. So did you get one of the backpacks? Okay, we'll get you a backpack. Yeah, yeah, cool. No other questions or anything? Nope, cool. So yeah, remember you can come and see me if you want some help later. This might all make more sense when you actually start doing your assignments.